We start with the elves racing over landscapes completely on foot whilst heading towards Eregion to go check on that celery Brimbo fella who's been ghosting all their messages recently. And before you can say, why the heck didn't they bring a few horses already? A smashed up sabotaged bridge forces team leader Elrond to decide to go south through some dodgy hills, which Galadriel reckons is full of danger and traps. But Captain Flatface don't care about no stinking danger and traps, cause going north would add 2 weeks to their trip. So just tells her to stop giving perfectly sensible warnings while simultaneously undermining my leadership decisions and emasculating me in front of my own men, and shut up about it already. Elsewhere, phony fakey Gandalf is out looking for his 2 mates, what he blew away with his magic tricks, but not in a good way. But instead of finding 2 small fannies with hairy feet, he just runs into some rando hermit fella called Tom Bombadil, while said hairy mates soon find a rando of their own when they encounter a local hobo who seems to go to the same hairstylist as the characters in Dragon Ball Z. Apparently, his name is Merrimack, who's part of a race called the Stoors, and who seems to take an instant shining to Nori's chubby mate, whilst Poppy herself also seems to have a raging wide-on for this Asian vagrant, given they both have shit haircuts. And after he takes them back to his place, his leader Gundabao just can't believe this fella's such a player that he went out to fetch some water and came back with 2 young broads desperate to go back to his gaff. Kya! He must have signed up to Andrew Tate's Hustler School or something. And after they find out that the Harfoots are looking for their wizard mate, what loves molesting trees and exposing himself to little girls for some reason, they don't really want him bringing that type of bloke around here, cause they're clearly a classy bunch of peeps, so he'll probably seize their asses and totally tie 'em up. Meanwhile, the main masked bounty hunter reluctantly reports to his Dark Master that him and his team totally failed in capturing 2 tiny fake hobbits and an exhausted bloke who was on death's door only moments earlier. So said Dark Lord tells him to put his socks up and go look for the girls again, because he's going to go after the other wizard himself.
Oh shit, not good.
Hilariously, said wizard is enjoying a nice soak in the tub after randomly being eaten by a tree because reasons, as this magical bomb guy proceeds to talk about himself in the 3rd person and totally implies he's immortal.
Okay.
So naturally, Gandalf asks to be his apprentice so he can better control his abilities, and maybe not blow his mates away with his magic, but not in a good way no more. Later, the elves arrive in a spooky wood called the Barrow-Downs, where lots of ancient warriors are buried, and soon fret for their safety after they find the ruined body of that lackey what the king sent a few weeks back to go warn Celery Brimbor about Sauron and shit, as the ginger elf essentially calls them all pussy-holes and tells them not to be such nervous Nellies already.
Fear not, dead men are no threat.
And before they can bollock him for inevitably jinxing them with famous last words, they're indeed attacked by a bunch of dead men, who've apparently been awakened by a grave evil spreading all over the earth. And before you can say, sounds like my uncle when he got red-pilled about communism last week after Elon exposed Brazil's insane censorship demands on Twitter, and also with the UK arresting pensions for Facebook memes and stuff. We cut over to amateur Aladdin lookalike Isildur and the first black elf with a face full of Botox, who are still looking for that dopey Theo kid who got kidnapped last epi. And the next morning, Astrid advises they look north, which totally raises the suspicions of that Don Lemony Archer guy, who promptly interrupts their flirting session to try and catch her out, given he's noticed a wound on her neck, what looks suspiciously like Adar's symbol, what he brands his goons with, and soon exposes her for being a total liar spy, which naturally breaks poor Isildur's heart, given he ain't even got her knickers off yet. So they cover her hands and head off to search north for Theo, when suddenly the pussy-o Aladdin melt gets himself sucked off in a bog. And I don't mean in a good way like a midnight quickie in the Weatherspoons toilets on a Friday night. And before you know it, both men are sucked down and swallowed by sludge, before cutting their way out of a giant mudworm what rudely gobbled them up. Anyway, Nori opines about their recently deaded Harfoot leader Sadok Burrows. You know, that Sir Lenny of the Henrys fella what died on the spot of sheer boredom last season? And hearing the surname Burrows totally triggers this bird, given a legendary tribal leader of theirs by that name once went off to find a promised land where they could all live happily ever after in, but mysteriously never returned. And soon gets her hopes up that maybe he finally did find said promised land after all, and has now sent these 2 dopes to come deliver their people to paradise already. But unfortunately, Nori rains on her parade, and says whoever that was what she's banging on about was probably a total failure, giving their tribe has no home and instead just walks about all day singing cringy songs and hauling giant wheelbarrows full of shite from place to place. And after the hunters arrive and commit a straight up hate crime by physically assaulting a female minority person of colour and who's of limited height to boot, she says she ain't heard of no stinking Harfoots and don't bloody know where they are already. Elsewhere, Elrond warns Gladders to be careful wearing that ring, what gradually poisons its wearer over time and also makes them all moody and like they've constantly got PMT. But she just says, I ain't even worn it for days, you cheeky sod, and that's just the extent of my acting talent. Whilst the soldier soon interrupts them to advise that he's heard some drums. And before you can say, the last fella who kept hearing drums went nuts and tried to kill that Doctor Who fella by making him really, really old because reasons, Astrid thanks Isildur for trusting her and releasing her chains by cheekily nicking his sword. But before the first Black Don Lemon with one facial expression can neutralise her with one of his pointy shafts, they are soon surrounded and beaten by massive wood. And before I can say, last time I was surrounded and beaten by massive wood, I vowed never to go back on Grindr ever again, these living tree thingies are pretty pissed that everyone around here keep chopping up their brothers and sisters and shit. So Arondir totally cucks and begs forgiveness, and promises them that they'll keep the naughty orcs and presumably any smelly tree hugging hippies from bothering them from now on. And once they let them all go, including that dopey Theo fellow what they snatched last epi, Astrid gets her karmic comeuppance for doing a bunch of bad things by, checks notes, being totally uninjured after taking a heavy whack to the ribs by a giant living tree monster, and also being reunited with her long-lost bae, which again breaks Aladdin's heart.
Aww.
And we end with the elves coming under attack by an army of orcs, as Elrond watches Galadriel heal their mate with her magic ring, and then go smack up a small army on her own like an empowered female boss bitch what don't need no man, because stunning and brave feminism, bro.
Yes, Queen, slay!
Before literally telling a bunch of oppressed minorities to go back to where they came from, and probably getting herself captured by Adar like a riot wally for being such a blatant and openly xenophobic white supremacist. And that's it. That's episode 4. Though my favourite part was the bit where they try and imply that the ginger elf is going to be the first of the gang to get deaded, only to fall back on antiquated racialist tropes to find out it's actually the black guy who dies first.
Get out of here. Get out of here, man. Shit, I'm saying.
But anyway, on to episode 5. We start with Dwarf King Durin undermining his chief miner and also his own son by telling them exactly where to dig to create sun shafts, giving the magic ring what the elves gave to him recently and started whispering to him and shit. Whilst elsewhere, Anatard totally bollocks his mate Sellers for pissing about with midgets when they could be cooking up some rings for the race of men already. But he just says, normal blokes are too much of a pussy hole to handle these jewels. Now stop trying to emotionally manipulate me into making gems for men and shut up about it already. But Tardface just won't let it go and says sod it then. We'll make 9 of the fuckers to ensure they're thrice perfected. And I'll bloody do it all myself if you're too cucks, son. Speaking of cucks, over in Numenor, Pharazôn and his soy boy son Kemen totally revel in being the new royal family after an eagle turned up to approve their straight up coup what they did last epi. As said Pharazôn fella randomly tells his son that even his dead mum knew he'd grow up to be a total melt and prophesied that he'd inevitably come to ill ends. But hilariously refuses to tell him anything more about her dodgy visions of his own fate unless he starts impressing his dad with his service already.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Aladdin's old mate Valendil tells disgraced ex-sea captain Elendil that anyone who was still loyal to that blind black queen has now been stripped of their rank. Because turns out his own daughter has been promoted and is now putting the boot down on all them rotters who supported Miriel taking them to war what seemingly got her brother Isildur killed, and all because she kept looking into the blue prophecy ball what the weirdo elves gave him. Or some shit. But he don't care about no stinking Emma Watson looky-likey bird lecturing him about duty and shit, because she committed treason in his eyes, and besides, all of his old sailing colleagues still respect him and recognise him as a boss man, so stick that up your pipe and smoke it, bitch. Back at Eregion, Celery Brim Bozo is writing a letter to his king Gilgachad, and lying through his teeth about how he totally complied with orders to shut down his forge now he's made the 3 rings for the king in Lingdon, because they continue to make loads of the things over here. Meanwhile, in Khazad-dûm, the first black female dwarf without a beard, aka Deezer, warns Prince Durin that it's a bit fucking worrying that his dad's hearing voices telling them where the sweet spots are in the mountain, and no good could possibly come of him doing her one job better than her. Anyway, a little later, said Lisa Bird and her cut hubby Durin go gift shopping for their kid's upcoming birthday. But because he's broke as fuck after being stripped of his title and bank accounts after backsassing his daddy last season, and still not being reinstated even after finally manning up and apologising a few weeks back, he totally resents having to pay 200 quid for a epoxy crystal ball that was probably made in China, as the merchant tells him that the extortionate prices are all his dad's fault anyway, given he's imposed a ludicrous sales tax on all items which he's calling a ring tribute. And before you can say, why are these two remotely surprised at this news when they still both see their father and father-in-law at work every day, and surely must have heard about such a huge and impactful greedy scheme already? Disa channels the energy of these fucking writers by totally dropping the ball, and soon ends up finding it in some kind of newly opened up cave what's formed due to all the recent mining activity and shit. And after doing all that haggling and reducing the price down to 150 coins for a crappy plastic ornament what was likely made by young dwarves in sweatshops, she goes and bloody drops it again after hearing scary roars of some sort of creature down below, and just can't believe she married into royalty yet still has to live in fucking caves.
What a fucking liberty!
Whilst upstairs, the king totally celebrates the recent achievements of needing a half-sentient ring to tell him all to dig upward to find sunlight, and then tells his fellow dwarf lords all about the 7 magic gems that will totally change their people's future forever, but also that if they want one of them, then they need to fork over a bunch of gold and shares of land for them. And later, he recklessly tells his chief digger bloke to totally ignore his pussy old health and safety restrictions what he put in place himself years ago to keep everyone safe and secure whilst doing the dangerous job of mineral mining, and to bloody go deeper already. And before the small chief can make a
That's what she said.
US office joke whilst in his boss's office, the king goes all paranoid when he forgets he took off his ring on the table earlier and immediately accuses the local midget of totally nicking the thing. Lol, ooks. And despite Durin Jr. desperately warning his dad that there's some sort of giant fuck off hell beast stirring under the mines, the king simply tells him that the ring says that there is no danger, and the inanimate rock what sometimes whispers to him totally knows better than his Boomba Clark wife what's always meddling in their business and stuff. Anyway, back at Eregion, the workshop is back to being haunted again, just like in episode 1, when that Halbrand guy disappeared and started hanging out in his fireplace or some shit. But turns out it's not a bona fide ghosty ghouly spook this time, but instead some traumatised assistant what reckons she turned invisible and entered some kind of disturbing dimension shrouded in mist and darkness. And no, not current day smog-filled London, but a place where a horrible fiery beastie bloke totally tried to oppress her and stuff. Before Celery Brim Bum Bum totally bollocks her for stupidly adding more mithril to the forging process this time, but weirdly refuses to share the proper recipe for making normal rings what don't send you to mental dimensions of pure hell. And after Durin turns up demanding to know why his dad's going full Gollum about some shitty ring and also becoming greedier than a Ukrainian president, the master crafter just can't believe his workmanship and professional integrity is being questioned by this hairy gnome bloke, but is soon encouraged to rethink placing his trust in this blonde rando what just turned up in his fireplace with a new face a few weeks back, while said rando is busy manipulating the vulnerable trauma patient by gaslighting her into believing that the form she saw wasn't his true form, but instead of Celery Brimbore's, given he's recently fallen into corruption and exhaustion and stuff, before trying to sweeten her up to him by saying that she looks a bit like Galadriel in certain lights. And for some reason, she takes it as a bloody compliment, being compared to an uptight miserable twat with constant PNT and zero sex appeal. Later, over in Numenor, Soy Boy Twink Boy Keeman, who's totally on a power trip and also desperately trying to impress his father so he can learn more about his dead mum's visions and stuff, smugly desecrates a holy shrine and promptly gets decked by an enraged Elendil, before then pissing off an already fed up and unemployed Valendil to boot, until the V-Dog finally comes to his senses and totally drops the beef. But unfortunately, he also drops his sword right next to a humiliated Beta Boy, and thinks it's a genius idea to turn his frigging back on him. And in a shocking twist, what no one could ever see coming, said humiliated Beta Boy totally stabs him in the back, and makes him do that dying thing in the arms of his ex-sea captain. No! As the coward then just orders his guards, who totally witness exactly what just went down right in front of them, to ignore the evidence of their eyes and ears and totally do a cover-up, and tell everyone that they both just tried to lead a naughty uprising, yo. Elsewhere, Anatard does some more gaslighting by telling old Sellers to make sure someone else ain't manipulating him, given he's finally grown the balls to call him out to his face about potentially meddling with the forging process to make his assistant turn see-through and witness horrible things and stuff. As Anna T soon turns his own anxieties back on him, by saying that the spiritual aspect of the forging process has totally been poisoned by deceit, given he did that lying thing to his own king in the letter that he wrote to him earlier, and that he's totally made way more than the 3 rings what he's told him about and shit. So he says he better write another pronto totally confessing about doing all these bad things, or else all the rings they make in the future will be even worse. And instead of making small elves see strange men in weird dimensions, they might accidentally enter the real world and start having to sit through 2 full seasons of the Rings of Power.
No, God! No, God, please, no! No! No!
After Durin once again pleads with his daddy to go easy on his ring already. Steady. Said king has had enough of his son's constant whinings, and instead placates him by restoring his title and bank accounts again. Huzzah! Whilst the frustrated and ego-bruised Celery Brimbor then totally bollocks his own staff by blaming them for the shoddy quality of the final products, despite them carrying out his explicit instructions to the nth degree. But he just tells them to buck up their ideas or find new jobs already, cause pissing around in alternate dimensions and meeting up with strange blokes all on the company dime just ain't fucking on, son. And after he goes upstairs to have a little cry, Anatard gives them all a pep talk and cheers them up a bit, which just makes him feel even more shit, to be fair. And we end with Elrond finally arriving back at Linden to tell King G that the naughty orcs are about to arrive at Eregion to tear some shit up, whilst the recently captured Gladders is physically molested by that cringy good guy orc with a family. And before you can say, does your crusty bucktooth floozy wife know you're putting your hands all over another woman who's also somehow less likeable than anyone in your own race of evil demonic goblins? She soon turns the tables and takes Adar captive, who instead offers to do a trucy team-up, given they both had the same enemy in that Sauron fella, or totally killed her brother and now also haunts fireplaces because reasons. And that's it. That's episode 5. Though my favourite part was the bit where Celery Brimbor passively aggressively called his new dwarf mate Narvi a thief, while supposedly celebrating the combined achievements.
Now take note, Smiths. Watch Narvi very closely while he's here, not only because he is a masterful artist, he's also a notorious thief. Do not let any jewels go missing.
And then had the cheek to bollock that Anatard fella for constantly doing some naughty inception thing on his brain.
It is a game you play, is it not? Sowing seeds in others' minds and then convincing them that the fruit is of their own thought.
But anyway, that's the plot and that's your lot. Considering in that bit all things so you don't miss any future recaps. Tell me if you like this show in the comments if you have time. And I'll send you to another dimension on company time in the next one.